So I picked up this well-used GTX 970 a little while ago with the intention of using the budget build, and after initial testing it quickly became apparent that it's overheating. My initial plan for this card was just to slap it in a Ryzen 3000-ish system and call it a day, but unfortunately the recent GPU shortages made me forcefully reconsider that position, to the point where for the last month and a half this has actually been my main daily drive. If you like to skip the teardown and repaste, I suggest you go straight to the 3-minute mark where the benchmarks begin. It quickly became apparent that this card was torn down maybe once or twice before I got to it. While I'm usually happy to find new paste on an older GPU like this, I think someone confused the toothpaste with the thermal conductive grease, or I don't know, something along those lines. In all likelihood, the person before me bought a cheap tube of paste from eBay and called it a day, thinking that all of them are the same. That actually wasn't the worst of it. Unfortunately, the bearings on the blower fan were well worn and they made a really high-pitched noise when close to idle, so it was very annoying to use it for any prolonged period of time. Unfortunately, most of the time just tearing down, cleaning and lubricating an old fan will usually not do the trick, because by the time you get to it it's going to be too far gone. But it is still a decent interim solution, so you can keep on using it until you can find the time or the spare part and replace it. In my case, only the acoustic performance was suffering, and it might be also a little bit of bias considering the last blower style GPU I had was a GTX 480, and that was about 10 years ago or so, and that particular realization did not make me any younger. A thicker grease is probably a better alternative for this application, but since I couldn't be asked to go and find some, I just used the thing that I had at hand, which is some gun oil. Just don't use any WD-40. It might seem like a good idea, but trust me, it's not. Unless it's the white lithium or spray grease kind of WD-40, in which case feel free to use it, and definitely it's gonna be a lot more effective than what I'm using here. And just like that, we are seeing a 7-degree drop in temperature under the exact same test conditions, only after a repaste. Fast forward about a month and I got this replacement blower fan from eBay that came straight from China. Fortunately, this one is a slightly different revision with only 3 screws, and I wrote back to the seller and I told him that I selected his wear precisely because I inspected very carefully the photos and they were the revision I required. This time I got lucky and they offered me their apologies for sending their own one and gave me a full refund. The good news is that it's gonna work just fine, even if it's sitting a little bit crooked, but unfortunately it won't actually fix the poor acoustics of this card, simply because blower style fans are not known for being silent. They've largely been phased out in favor of other designs, so it's gonna be even more interesting to see if this card is still relevant in 2021. I believe I got a decent deal on it with 50 British pounds, but I seen this going on my local marketplace for upwards of £100, which for an American friends that's almost $140. As you can see from the specs listed on screen, the only limiting factor in this system should be the GPU, with everything else being a lot more modern. First off, Heaven, which is an older benchmark, does remarkably well on this GPU on high settings and 1080p, averaging 88 FPS with remarked consistent frame times, but this is to be expected on an age-appropriate benchmark. This used to be an upper mid-range GPU at the time after all. In Superposition, which is a much newer benchmark, it does predictably less well, but it still posts a very respectable 40 FPS. First actual game we're gonna be looking at is Rocket League, which has an artificial 240 FPS limit, and to my surprise at high settings 1080p this card was always up against it, so moving on. Next is another esports title, namely everybody's favorite Fortnite, and again here predictably this, what it's now considered a lower end graphics card, did very well. The first AAA title we're gonna be taking a look at is Hitman 3, and would you look at that? That is very impressive performance for such an old GPU. I really wasn't expecting such a strong showing here. I thought that we are going to be a lot more limited by the VRAM than we actually are, but I guess this is a hold up from the fact that Hitman 3 has been more of an iterative game for the last 4 years or so. Oh, and by the way, any stutters you may notice were purely down to the capture card and they were not actually present during gameplay. Up is Horizon Zero Dawn, and here too the GTX 970 did a proper job, scoring about 46 FPS average, while it automatically defaulted to the favorite quality preset. I have a funny feeling you can get even more performance out of this if you lower the VRAM usage to about 3.5 GB from 4, due to the fact that the last 500 MB of a GTX 970 are not as high speed as the rest of the memory, this being down to the way the core was cut. I remember it was a big deal and Nvidia got into a bit of trouble at the time. It's not the strong showing for this card, posting a near constant 60 FPS at 1080p. I was actually able to turn everything up except environmental textures in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and I think it produced a really nice gaming experience. Obviously this is a benchmark, so you're going to get closer to 50 in game. If you don't have a high refresh rate monitor, I think in this game I would gladly sacrifice some FPS for the added visual eye candy. In Cyberpunk though, well, this is where this card actually begins to chug. Sticking to medium some low settings in the downtown area while it's raining, which is admittedly a worst case scenario for any graphics card in this game, the FPS is going to average around 30, which while playable is not ideal. Here you really start to see the limitations of this card and how much technology has progressed in the last 7 years. But nonetheless, as a secondary gaming PC or a kid's machine, this is really not bad, and anyone would be hard pressed to do any better for £50. Do I wish it to be closer to 45 FPS instead of 30? Yes. Is that unreasonable to demand? Probably also yes. There are various tweaks out there that can be applied that will change settings that are not readily available in the menu, and you will get closer to that 45-50 FPS average, but the downside is that it's also going to cut out a lot of things that you wouldn't necessarily want cut, and that would mute a lot of the developers' hard work in this game, admittedly making it look more like 2014 than 2020. Turning the resolution down to 900p or using the built-in resolution scaler will make everything a lot smoother, but for whatever reason I feel that this game becomes unbearably blurry. I don't know, maybe it's just my imagination, and a smaller monitor is gonna look a lot better, but on my 65-inch TV that I usually use for playing games, it looks really bad, to the point where it actually put me off from playing the game, and I still haven't decided if I'm going to wait until I get my hands on a 3080 or I'm going to just accept the fact that I'm gonna play this with 30 FPS like in the quote-unquote mid-2000s good old days. And now finally onto GTA 5, which is an era-appropriate game, which at the time I remember playing on an SLI 980 setup, not expecting any miracles here. So I dialed in some high-ish settings. I think it really speaks volumes to the staying power of this game when you can look at it after you just played Cyberpunk 2077 and still not find it ugly or antiquated or anything like that. Well, and that's about it for this video. I hope it helps you decide what kind of price you should be paying for one of these older GPUs if you do find yourself in the market for one. Also politely reminding any sellers that are charging well north of £100 for one of these that scalping isn't limited to the newer model GPUs. It can be done with a 7-year-old one just as easily.